So, mate, when did you first go to sea?
1947.
Oh yeah, and how old were you then?
15.
Yeah. Hard question, I know, but why did you go to sea?
Well, the area where I was brought up was very poor, and most of the area was full of Catholics. And, you know, that was, and they were the poorest mob of the lot. And in Frederick Street, out of that street, 7 of us went to sea.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was your first ship then, Bill?
It was the Mernu. She was built 1926.
Yeah,
I joined her as deck boy down at Williamstown,
Yeah.
and she went from there to Tasmania, a load of potatoes and that. And the first thing the bosun was Nugget Williams, and he told me that the first thing I had to do, forget about me mother. You're in a union. You won't be in a union for 3 months before you can join the union. Just 3 months. You won't be issued with white cards, and there'll be 2 different delegates will sign your book. You know that, and you won't be attending the meetings because you're not a member of the union. You wait outside the mess room till the
Yeah, right. Yeah.
till you get your book. I finally got my book, and I stayed in the Mernu till I got my time in as deck boy. Then I joined the Coringa, the old Coringa, not the container one, and I was on her in 49 when the coal strike came. You know that. We all got the sack in Newcastle. Then I went into the Age. Do you want me to name all the ships I've been on? It will go on and on.
Yeah.
Then went on the Age, and after I got out of the Age, I said I'll most of the seamen like Pat Garrity and myself and other union officials they hadn't come as union officials. There was no overseas ships on the Australian coast, so Pat Garrity joined I think it was the Ocean Faith, and I joined a ship called the Heron's Pool on a ropeness, took it to the UK, and had to work my own way back again. After I got back on the coast, you just had to pay your book up in those days. I sailed out of Newcastle for 3 years. I won't go how many iron boats, but there was one particular turn there in 1950, and the Iron Yampy, when we walked ashore in Whyalla. I was in the coal strike dispute. I was in the pilot boat then, in the Acuna and the Victoria, the name of the pilot boats were. And that in 1950 we walked off the Iron Yampy in Whyalla, and the skipper Hodgkins rang down and ripped half the jetty off because we wouldn't sail because there was a sick seaman. But we made them rebirth the ship and things like that, and I shipped out of Newcastle for 3 years, which I had many happy times. There was many iron boats and river boats. We won't go into the black and tan run.
Yeah.
Do you know that?
Yeah.
And in 1951, I joined another British ship called the Avis Moat. I took her to the UK, and I came back on the Devon, got out of the Devon, then I was in Sydney, and went and paid me book up, and I ran into my brother, and I said, "What are you in?" He said, "I'm in the Merino." I said, "What's she like?" He said, "We need about 4 ABs. And I said, "Well, there's no ABs up on the roster, so I'm not on the pickup in those days." So I joined her with him, and he said, "Well, we've got a big cargo on here of French paintings for the Hobart Museum." Bad luck, we ran aground on a reef for 14 days on Bluestone Bay outside Hobart.
Right.
We finally got her off, and that we took her back up to Sydney, and they had to renew the complete bottom of the ship, and I joined the West Australia then, to my regret, because I'm not a passenger ship man, but I didn't last long in her, so I went back into the Iron Kimberley and the Iron Derby and ships like that. After joining those ships, I rejoined the Merino again, but and my brother was still on it, and he said, "Well, we'll make a home here. We'll really settle in." He stepped backwards and fell down a big hatch and broke his arm.
Oh, right.
Ship went on from there to Sydney, and most of us were all up at King's Cross there having a few ales, and not using the gangway, I fell in between the ship and the wharf in 7 Circular Quay and was an hour and a half in the water, and the police arrested me. Reckons I was committed suicide and who pushed me in and all that rubbish. So you could never go back to your ship after you got 48 hours compo in those days. So after that I joined the Kutara, and happy ship that was. So we all got the sack in Newcastle for sticking her up, and it went from there. I went on the Larina and things like that. I was on the Larina, then I joined the after the Larina I joined the Trialis. I was on the Trialis. I relieved Hawkeye, which is a famous seaman on the coast. I relieved him. It was going to be for 2 weeks, but the ship shot up the Cockatoo dry dock for a month. Then we load the boys in Nauru. Then we load them in Ocean Island. We went off to Auckland and New Plymouth. The time I got off was just on 2.5 months. After that, I joined the Elmore. I got out of the Elmore and I joined the one of Hollyman's again, the Tarina. And after that, I got out of the. I was in the one of the sugar ships anyhow. And I joined the. I was in the pickup and there was no one on the roster, and I joined the Trieste. I stayed there for quite a while, and some mishaps happened on her. That's too long a story to tell about the Trieste. After the Trieste, I joined the Melbourne Tugs. Roger Wilson said there's a relieving job in the Tugs. When I got down there, Maxie Woods or Alan Woods said, well, that's a permanent job. Well, every job was going up and down the river. It drove me mad because I wasn't meant to be in the Tugs, and that there was a ship coming in called the Cumulus, a Swede, and I yelled out, is there any jobs on it? And Bunny Rabbits was the bosun there from Sydney, and he said, yes, come round. So I threw my hand in on the Tugs and went away on the Cumulus, which ended my marriage too, because I was away for 6 months on her. Came back and I joined the Australian, Roger Wilson put me into a famous ship called the South Esk, which I thought was on the Tassie run, but she dived up to Weeper Cove and Groot Island, loaded copper in Townsville for Port Kembla. She was only 1,800 tonnes, and a very small ship.
Deanie, before you go too much further, just drop back to the tri-boats and how they used to do the buoys and that in Nauru, because they were big buoys and deep moorings, weren't they?
Very deep moorings. And the bows used to have two bow plates. You had to take them off. You used to run the runners through the forecastle, and a runner on the outside of the ship, and when it used to drop off one of the bows, you had to get over on the bosun's chair and shackle it on, and then heave it round onto the deck and slack off on the other one on 2 winches. And to do the buoys, it wasn't a 5-minute job, it was a very dirty job. Them tri-boats were well fitted out because they had big winches in the forecastle, bigger than any of the winches I'd ever seen, There was 22 ABs there, 2 ordinary seamen, and most of the men that I've sailed with were in those ships. We're all good seamen and good comrades,
We'll come back to that South Esk again in a minute, but I was going to ask you too, what were the sizes of the crews, like the early days in the 50s?
Oh, in the 50s, well, there was, they went by the tonnage, I was in the Bandolier there, and I think we had 14 ABs on it, that.
And then how many down below?
There was 9 down below.
And then you had your cooks and stewards.
That's right. There was generally 3 cooks. First cook, chief cook, a second cook, and the spud barber. And then after the deck boys used to have to scrub the mess rooms out, but not with mops in them days. They had to scrub the tables properly, and also on your hands and knees scrubbing the decks. But the firemen, most of the time, the firemen got better black pans than us and things like that, because the firemen were the strongest in the union in them days.
Just for the film, you better tell them what a black pan is.
A black pan was that if you're on the 4 to 8, you couldn't have your meal at 5 o'clock. You had to wait till 8 o'clock, and that was the best meal of the day. everybody used to queue up to get the black pan of a night, especially in the phosphate ships, because the phosphate ships were the best fed I've ever been in to this day.
Yes.
You know that, and they had and the best accommodation, and also some of the best crews I sailed with, like Jimmy Steele was there, Billy Bird, Ron Barclay. They were all, and Freddie Watson, one of my personal friends, Fred Watson. Him and I sailed on the Lorina together. We sailed on the Kutara together. We were in a riverboat together, and we were also in an iron boat together. So all those type of blokes made this union.
Yeah.
You know, they actually did.
What were the accommodation like when you went to sea? What sort of accommodation?
Accommodation was mainly forecastles, all in one room.
And that'd be all the ABs on one side?
All ABs one side, the firemen the other side.
Yeah.
But generally the ABs, like on the Lorina, that was in 1960, the ABs lived forward and the firemen lived aft on it, you know. Very unusual ship she was, you know. She was taken over by the Yanks during the war, and she had the whistle on her was a Japanese shell where she'd been hit, you know. But she was sold to the Chinese, and she was towing two dredges around Wilson's Promontory, and she lost the dredges. She ended up being the Irene Breeze. I don't know what happened to her.
Right. Yeah. And you say that the good food on the tri-boats. What was the food like on some of the others?
Oh, some of them were very rough, you know. And if you fell out with a cook, you know. But the whole thing is what the industry, it was the men that made the job, you know. It wasn't only one or two people on. The comrade ships in those days were the best of the lot, the shipboard meetings. And if you, I remember on the overseas trade, we all went up to the Australian consul and everybody voted Labor, you know. And all the way through my life I've always voted Labor. And I know I've thrown that in, but it was the only thing for the working class, you know that.
Right.
I should tell you about when I went to school.
Yeah, go on.
No, I won't.
No, say what you want. This is in your own words, mate.
He's talking reform school, mate. That's where they threw him out.
Yeah, but the whole thing is that I never went well at school. I think Frank left when he was 14, and I think I left about a week later, you know that, because you wasn't fitted in those days because your mother couldn't afford to send you to school. And, you know, the Christian Brothers bullshit.
Who's the oldest, you or Frank?
Frank was.
How much older than you was he?
No, we won't go into it. We won't go into
I'll try and snip that
Yes,
one in, mate.
yeah. And but you know what? The whole trouble is, I ran into Frank a few times. He was on the Windara. I ran into him in Darwin there. Then I ran into him on the Barossa. Him and Hawkeye were watchmates on the Barossa together. And then I ran into him on the River Burnett when she ran aground here, you know. And when she got off, they loaded. I ran into Roger Wilson. Roger said to me, "There's a lot of trouble going on down in Bass Strait. We're going to put a number of years down there, Jack Davey and myself and Jeff Swain. We went down, and Peter Lapinia. We went down to the Bass Strait to try and organise to get the scabs off the ships down there. I had the misfortune that we were bringing anchors up on an A-frame, and that a rope broke and hit me in the face of not the Sedco, forget the name of that. No, the Smith Lloyd 33, you know. And then I was on the another thing with Tex Boucher, and we all got the sack there because Tex told the skipper he was a Ku Klux Klan and things like that. But the history of the union, the members made the history of this union. That's not, as I just said before, it wasn't one or two. They were the union. They made the decisions and things like that. And today it seems a different game now. It seems to be a lot into the money business, you know that.
Can we go back to some of your early ships? What sort of time were you in port to load or to discharge? How long were you in port?
Well, like the Murnu, she went across to Launceston, and that she was there 3 weeks loading timber, because they put all the timber in by hand, one piece and you were there for 3 weeks. But there was no overtime in the ships. They'd get enough work out here with that, you know that. But the main thing was that it was you were the best dressed seaman in the 50s, you know that. All your money went on your clothes, and the 60s, I think, and even in the 70s. But it seemed to have all drifted away now.
What I remember him saying was he went ashore looking like a Commodore and come back looking like a stevedore.
That's exactly right. That's a good saying. That's about right too, John.
Yeah.
You know.
So that would have been unusual, though, 3 weeks. What would?
Well, sometimes you're longer. Like the Iron Yampy there, we'd load coke in Kembla, then we go and top up with coal in Newcastle, and we'd be in Wyala for 21 days or longer, you know. Then she'd load pig iron, you know that. And the time you got the pig iron out up in Newcastle, you know, then they decided that those ships were too big and too slow getting in and out of port. They went back to the Iron Monarchs and the Iron Dukes and the old ones, you know.
And what about your leave arrangements those days?
Well, the leave arrangements was this: you're allowed to stay on a ship for 12 months. You know that. You had to stay 12 months to get 2 weeks leave. And if you stayed but never come back to the ship, you wasn't allowed to go back to the ship. And if you stayed 15 months, you got a month's leave, but you never come back to the ship. And all those mad ideas, they were mad ideas. A lot of people wanted to go back to their ships, but they never got back to the ships, you know. And the compensation, if you got 48 hours from a doctor, the ship master used to get rid of people. Companies would ring up and say, well, they're too militant or something, and you would get 48 hours compo, and that was it. And you never went back.
Yeah, right. And what about, can you tell us something about the overtime?
Well, the overtime was 2 and 2pence an hour. You know,
And
for Sunday for 4 and 4pence.
Yeah, for the maybe the younger people of today, 2 and 2pence comes out to 22 cents.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And and mainly the boatswains kept the overtime because he had to get the top. He always had to put himself on top. You know. But the thing is now, the ships were stuck up for oil skins and things like that. And
That was the question I was going to ask about. What was supplied?
there was nothing supplied, you know. And I was in an old wreck called the Camellia. I was in 2 Camellias, by the way. I was in an old one, and Billy Bird was in office at the time. And he came down in the 50s and he said, now this ship's in a bad way. I want you to stick her up for rubber mattresses and carpets, because we had straw mattresses, you know. And we stuck her up, and he said, those who want to keep sailing on a cam. So we all stayed on her, because if you got out after a dispute, you were pretty well in a bad way, you know. Well, we were in all the coal strikes and things like that, and even in 49, when the 2 of us were arrested down at Appleton Dock, Jimmy Smith and myself, when the Haligonian Duke came in, and the only one union person on her was the cook, and the Navy built the Army had to come in and unload the ship, you know that. And but one of the main disputes I was in was the Australian Enterprise, because there was 2 tugs outside waiting to take her off to China, and they just spent over $1 million onto the Australian National Line, and we sat in for 3.5 months. That's the longest dispute there was, and the thing was that Pat Garrity suggested a few of the crew of the Australian Enterprise go down to the Gunnedah mine. What happened on the Australian Enterprise? The engineers and the carpenter welded up all the doors. They put cowl covers on the funnel and things like that, and we were sitting at one entrance, and we just sat aboard in shocking conditions on that ship for 3.5 months. I dropped 2 of the anchors, took half Botany Bay Wharf, I think, in dropping one of them, and we went on to, I went down to the Gunnedah mine for 2 months. Laurie Steen, Ellen Oliver, and a number of other union officials, we all went up down the mine with the miners there, you know that, and they won the dispute up there. They were the same dispute that we were in, you know that.
Yeah. But
there was many disputes over holding up the ships for better cutlery, better laundries and things like that, you know. Most of the ships that I was on when they first started off was no such thing as a washing machine. They had just a boiler, and you used to put a steam hose in it, just to wreck your clothes and that. But after a while, a ship came on the coast called the Mara. She was the first with the washing machine. Then the Fiona came on with the silent night refrigerators. Every time the ship rolled, the fridge went off, you know. So, but putting it down that all the disputes that were done, it was through the officials and things like that. And I remember when Billy Bird, the miners were on strike, he drove a car with thousands of pounds all the way up to Newcastle with the miners there, you know. But in the 60s, Roger Wilson went off to get his ulcers done in Moscow, and Bert Nolan got in contact with me, and I relieved in office for 6 months, which is one of those thankless jobs you'd ever have in your life, being a union official, you know, which is a very hard job, and I was glad to see the back of it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, yeah. What about the pickup? You got any fond memories of the pickup?
Oh, the pickup was at the back of the Customs House, and that you came in and you all lined up. The chief officer had come along, and you had to stand up straight, and he walked up and down the line 2 or 3 times. In the end, a fella called Jinx O'Brien was the VO in Melbourne. He said, well, I'm not going to give him the whole line. There'll be 12 years go at each time, you know that. And as they walked past you, walk away. We're not going to cop this no more. But the picker, it was the ball system. A lot of the jobs were, some of our members wasn't so lily white. They'd go and meet the mate or the skipper in the pub, and the job would be already picked up. He'd wear a special tie or something like that. And it was well known on this coast that there was jobs taken out after it. But the old wrecks like the Bundelier, all the old, plenty of gear, ships with gear and that on, there was many of them on the coast. When I did come on the coast, it might shock a few, there was 123 shipping companies on the coast in 1947. I think it's down to about 5 or 6 now, you know, but there was thousands of seamen. There was plenty of seamen's jobs going. And the other good thing about everything is the superannuation. Yeah. Is that most of the seamen were in sailors' homes. There was a beauty here in Melbourne. There was about 3 or 4 years in it. We had our union rooms in there in Sidley Street, and that some of the sailors' homes there, they'd pay off a ship, their last pay, and they'd end up either in the Hotham or Markelly's in a back room, and they'd just die away, and then bum and drinks or something like that. Most marriages broke up when a seaman retired because they had no wages. And there was always a piece in the Age, 100 painters wanted seamen not to apply, you know. That was always in the Age, you know. But the comrade ships, there was blokes like Benny the Gorilla, a fireman, this Homeboat Smith. You could go through them, dozens and dozens of the different names they had for seamen, and that they're all comrades, you know that. And the phosphate ships really amazed me how close they were with their numbers, and they carried a lot of the union because they had the best rolling funds there, they had the best libraries, and I would say they had the best conditions, you know that. if you see 22 ABs painting the deck all on wooden stools, you know that, and then there's about 20 of them up the mast there, the job's got done very quickly, you know. But today, I was in one, the River Embley there, there's just no men left. Yeah, there's just no men left now. And it's a different ball game.
Well, for the sake of the film, how many would be on the River Embley?
The River Embley, I would say there'd be about 14 in the whole crew.
Yeah, so how many, but Chief IR
and there was only one on each watch.
so there'd be 4.
There was, I think there was 6 of us.
Right.
Yeah.
The Embley had 18 all up. She came down to 18.
Yeah, did she?
Yeah.
Because what it wasn't all IRs. They'd have three IRs and a bosun, and then they'd put a couple of trainees on. You know that?
Get away with the extra man.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. What was your last ship, Bill?
The last ship was I think it was the Argo, or it might have been the Boomerang. You know,
Yeah.
I think it was the Boomerang 1. You know.
And what are your plans?
Well, I pay me book up every year, but I've been having problems passing doctors now, you know, standing on one leg too long. And some of my Indian doctor friends, you know, that I can't seem to get on well with them. You know.
So we'd have to call you semi-retired.
Semi-retired, but I've still got the book there. But when the strange thing, after getting out of the Marino, I was on the Lorena there, and the ships once they got into the Tamar River, the first ship got up they got the waterside workers' labour, you know, and the Marino and the Lorena were both at anchor. I was boasting on the old Lorena. She was an old wreck, you know, and Freddie Watson said to me, I think they're heaving the anchor up on the Marino. So we told old Jock Smythe, the skipper, and he said, righto, we'll be going up the river. So Alan Brewster was boasting on the Marino, and we could hear them all chattering in the fog. But as we came round the bend, the Whirlpool reached there in the Tamar, the Marino hit us on the side, and the chief steward of the Bobby Brooks on the Lorena slipped right through it. There was wood all over him and everything, and we all headed to the inquiry. But before we got to the inquiry, we had a few ales in the Marine Hotel, and each one of us said the same thing. We were on the forecastle at the time of the when it got hit, yes. The crews all left happy and the 2 skippers were left arguing. But we had 2 months alongside the wharf in Launceston on the Lorena trying to get the ship fixed. So they booked us all into the Riverview Hotel with Johnny Gear and a few of us, and the team there, I think we were going to run out of Launceston at one stage, you know, because...
You mentioned some well-known names during the course of this.
Yeah.
Any other characters you want to...
Oh, I reckon like John Higgins and Johnny Gear were both my ordinary seamen on the Trieste, and they knew the job well, you know, and to think of these blokes, you know, that they're dedicated to the industry, you know, and most of the people that I sail with, I know, they go to their stop work meetings, they go to demonstrations and things like that, and they eat and sleep their life, you know that.
There was a bloke you mentioned a while ago, Deanie. Got a lot in common with you, this bloke had. Poor bugger's dead now. Homeboat Smith. We never could find out his real age either.
Well, Homeboat Smith and I were first time I ran into Jimmy Smith was in 1949. I was ordinary seaman. You had to do 2 years before you had to do 12 months as a deck boy and 2 years ordinary seaman and then the shipping master used to put you on a test. The main test was box the compass, you know. Half the time you couldn't remember it, you know. And I used to write it all on my arm, you know, so I could remember it. And Jimmy and I were on the Victoria, the pilot boat, an old coal burner, and then we got transferred to the a Kuna. She was a German prize war one in 1914, a lovely thing. And Jimmy and I went on the demonstration when the Haligonian Duke came, and we wound up in Port Melbourne. A number of times I had a night out with Jim. We'd end up in Port Melbourne, or we'd get pinched in the watersiders round to Belfast Paddy. They'd lock us up in Burke Street West, you know. But I think all those things are gone because I've got a waterside. I've got a thing I can go on the wharf now till 2016. You know.
Yeah, you mentioned a minute ago too about stop work meetings. What about the early stop work meetings?
The early stop work meeting.
How many men do you reckon would have been there?
I would say 300 or 400.
Mm.
And what it was, the cook had to have a 7-bell breakfast. We had to be off the ship by 8 o'clock. The meeting started right on 9, and that you had to go back to the ship at 1 o'clock, but you always asked for the half day off, you know. And no one missed a meeting.
No.
You know, everybody went. And if you didn't go to that meeting, half the time the mate would say, I want a gearman. Oh, you better put the apprentice on because we're all going to the meeting. And everybody couldn't get to the stop work meetings quick enough.
Mm.
You know that.
If you didn't go, you better have a bloody good reason why.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
And how times have changed.
And how times have really changed, you know that.
You mentioned Burke Street West.
Lovely spot.
Yeah,
You know?
I remember when we were having the meetings over the road from there.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Yeah, and if you happened to be late and you opened the door, it was just a solid cloud of smoke. You couldn't hardly see it.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. We're coming towards the end of it, mate. You got any?
I would like to. I'd just say a comment because when you done your time as a deck boy and bucko and AB and bosuns and things like that and delegates, it's a big thing to give up to go as an IR. It was, you know that. Mick Dolman told me and John Higgins, if I didn't do the course, I wouldn't be at sea, you know, because that's the name. But well, I went across about the second or third ones that went in, and they had that many intakes coming into it, and seamen from all over the coast were there. Mick Dolman was in the big auditorium, and he said, what's got to happen here is we've got to have a coordinator here to try and organise all you people, and if you get into any strife, you've got to go along and see him. He said, I'm nominating Billy Dean. And I said, I don't think I could do it. I said, I haven't been back to school for years. I'm having trouble with figures and that. And he said, no, you'll make it. And I said, well, I'll pick my own delegates. I picked Alan Oliver, Mark Armstrong, Frankie Lowe, and they were the delegates. And they handled the job properly, do you know that? Mm. But it was very heavy over there, and I got into a lot of problems with the college over there because the Stephen Brown, they brought people from North the Dole to paint the inside where the workshop was, and I said, well, we're not working in here with while they're painting. So the fellow that was in charge, I fell out with him many times over the food and a number of other things, and when everybody was about to leave, the pilot strike came, and they said, well, we've already booked out. But the strange thing about it, when they were calling everybody up to get their certificates, all of a sudden they'd lost my papers. So Fred Stein was in charge there. I think he's in Canada now. Him and I never got on. He said, well, we can't find your papers, so we will post them to you. I said, well, that's great. So when we got to the airport, John Higgins, I rang him, and John said, I've organised an army plane to get you all out of Launceston. So we all had to walk into the back door to get on board this army plane. You know that? I rang Pat Garrity up, and I said to Pat Garrity, well, they've lost my papers and that. And he said, I'm not going to go back. I said, I'm not going to go back, I don't care. He said, I want you to go back. So go back over there. So I arrived back over there in a couple of weeks, and an old good friend of mine, Brian Lee, was there. And Brian Lee said, what are you doing back over here? I said, well, I'm back over here to do another course. They reckon I never finished it. I'd go to all the courses, and they said, you're not wanted, you're not wanted. They'd make me sit at the back. Yeah, Fred Stein said, well, there's one of these courses that you missed. They messed me around for about a month, you know. Then they finally found, because I used to say, well, I'm sleeping in the morning. What's the good of me going for these courses? Do you know that? So they finally found all these. I went back to the Australian Advance, and they told me, well, you can't stay here. It's a bosun's job here. So I end up in the. John Higgins said, well, we're putting you into the Tasman, you know. So I went into Tasman there. Took me out of the Tasman, put me on a couple of other wrecks, you know, see how they were running. There was a few problems on the Flinders. I stayed there a number of years, which was a good job. Then we got sent over to Gibraltar. We were there for about 2.5 months waiting for the Scottish Wizard.
That was a wreck I was just about to ask you about, Danny.
Yes, the Scottish Wizard was quite a strange ship. Wayne Finch would tell you about, because it's one of those Osco ships, you know that. She was the Osco Stream, and that a very weird job, but nothing worked on her. I got in the crane, and the crane kept going round and round, and the only way they had to stop it was to run the oil out of it, you know. So she was a very strange job. The engine room, the skipper came to me and he called me on the bridge. He said, I've told you before, all curtains have got to be closed on this ship. He said, because I don't want any lights. I said, well, don't worry about that, Captain. Your funnels are light, you know that. So there's that many fires in the engine room, and Bernie Daly was the only one that could handle the engine room, because no one wanted to go into it, because there's always a light, you know that. And I ended up getting paid off with gallstones out of her, you know. Yes.
She was true in every way to the sister ship.
Yes. She was a complete wreck.
Yeah.
Couldn't get the anchors out. Couldn't get anything. And when she left Gibraltar, all the Spaniards said, God bless you, you know. She hasn't been into dry dock for 4 years. She fell off. When we joined her, there was rubbish right up to the side of the funnel. The chief mate said to me, he said, there's a fire in the engine room, get all the crowd. I said, no, the Russian crew is still on her. We haven't signed articles yet. We're all going back to our hotel, which we did. You know, we're there for 3 months. We went across to Algiers to load. They refused to load her because they said she was a complete wreck. None of the pumps worked or anything. And we ended up in Port Said for quite a while. Then when she got to Singapore, they refused to load her in Singapore. She had problems all along the line, you know. Nothing worked.
She didn't last that long on the coast, either, did she?
No, she did not.
Yeah.
She did not, you know, that... in the end, we were doing the right thing. Bernie Daly's cabin was a strange cabin that it was leaking all the time. He had old charts to put over the deckhead. The accommodation was quite good where I went into. I moved in. There was no electrician there, so I moved into the electrician's room and ordered a double bunk. So I had a double bunk in there, and the engineers used to hate me for that, you know. But I want to thank you for getting a bit of history out of me anyhow.
It's been good, mate.
You know.
You got anything else you want to add to it, Danny?
Oh, I'd like to remember all the comrades I sailed with.
Well, yeah, just name some of the, you know, the good old comrades you've already gone through. Homeboat and Freddie Watson.
I would say Jack Davey,
Jack, yeah.
one of the best seamen I ever sailed with.
Yeah.
On the Loretta there, I said, well, there's a wire broken up aloft, Jack. He said, yeah, I'm right, I'll go and splice it on my knee, up on the table there. Blokes like Jack Davey, And a lot of the good stewards I sailed with also, like Charlie Weldon, he was out there with me for a while, and young John Higgins. And, but blokes like some of the seamen, I can't recall a lot of their names, but I can't forget them because they were like Hambone Fay, poor old Hambone, you know. Yeah, yes, he's gone. Yeah, Hambone's gone. And
well, I'm used to hearing you mention as Fast Eddie.
Yeah, Eddie Austin was a very good friend of mine. He died when he was 52-year-old, you know that. And he had a habit of loving his soup, you know, that he loved soup so much, and that he used to get into the galley and steal any soup he could see. He got into trouble on one ship there with he drank all the gravy.
It was the Osco Star.
Yeah, I heard.
And we've got it on. We've actually got that on video.
Yeah,
the Osco Star of him drinking the gravy. Yeah, he said bloody good soup to the cook, and the cook said soup was me fucking gravy.
But I had 7 ships with Eddie, you know that. A good hand, you know. The cancer got hold of him, you know that. And like most of them, you know that have gone now. But like Fred Watson, things like that, you can't forget them people because they made the industry. Jimmy Steele's another good bloke, do you know that? Ron Barclay, all those people. You know.
What about the other people that you can't forget for the other reasons, like that nice little skipper who used to be on the Triaster?
Oh, I couldn't forget him, you know, Captain Evans, because I told him he was the coconut of all the trouble on the ship. I took him before the Marine Council, and he was sacking and logging people with the hat turned up, you know. And in the Triaster got into Geelong, and she was sailing. She had to go to Christmas Island, and Jimmy Steele come to me and said, and Big Barry Davis, they said they were the delegates, and said the taps there's all just black water coming out of them. So there was 70 odd in the crew. Captain Evans called us all on the bridge and sacked a lot of us. He said the ship will sail without yous. So we got Justice Gallagher down. I took Justice Gallagher up. I said, oh, this is the captain. And Captain Evans attacked the judge, and the judge said, well, ship's not going till they renew all the pipes. You know that. And, I'm glad you mentioned Captain Evans, you know. Yes.
Yeah, I know. I joined the Triaster after you got out. I had to put up with him.
Strange man. He used to have a steward standing behind him saying, these peas are not cooked like my wife cooks them, and that's all the ABs are all the trouble on the ship, which he caused a lot of trouble on that ship.
There was an unusual watchkeeper system on the tri-boat, Steenie. It was unusual to any other ships. Do you remember that?
Yes, there was 3 on a watch.
At the change of the watch butt, there used to be 12 on the bridge.
Yeah, all go up on the bridge. He made everybody go on the bridge. And make sure you didn't go to bed early or something like that, you know. Yes, I created a few things on the tri-boats, like a farmer.
Yeah.
Yes, the farmers were good, you know that.
You better tell the film what a farmer was, Bill.
The farmer was that you had a night off, you know that, or things like that, and you got booked in your overtime, you know, but you made up for it the next night, you know. You worked a couple of hours extra. But the whole thing now, when I first went to sea, that Fred Norris and Frank Nugent, they used to come down to the ships and sell the jeans, the American-style jeans, Frank Nugent, and in Sydney, Fred Norris sold the passenger blues. Many of us never had passenger blues, you know, because if you're in iron boats there, they didn't want to have nothing to do with you, you know. Because when I joined that West Australia, I got out of the Iron Derby, and the skipper said, why haven't you got your passenger blues? And he wouldn't even let me at the wheel till I went and got decent. I had an old pair of overalls on. But the Newcastle people were very strong. I've got to go into that. I joined the union in Newcastle, by the way. You know, I joined the union in the 16th of February 1948, because each time a delegate came, they paid off, and there was no one ever to sign me white card in it. And it was one of those things, the delegates had to sign it, you couldn't get in without it, you know. So I've had a pretty long run in the union, you know.
Yeah.
Deanie, were you on the Triester when Nauru was going for independence?
Yes. Jimmy Steele took all the papers up.
Tell the story about Hamilton Robert.
Oh, well, there's a lot of stories I could tell you about him.
The one where he wouldn't... The story I heard is when, after he got independence and the boys off the Triester...
That's right.
Yeah, he said, tell them to wait.
That's exactly right. Yeah. He wouldn't... Jimmy Steele and Ron Barclay and a few more, like Peter Schofield also, they did a lot getting all the Nauruans their independence. But he turned a dog on our people, you know, that. He reckons that we could go ashore and sit on the breakwater and watch movies and everything, but we had to get back aboard as soon as the launch came. He wouldn't, but never came about anyhow, you know that. No, he did turn a dog on the people, do you know that? Especially the seamen, because Jimmy Steele used to take all his papers to the courts and things like that, you know. And they used to half load in Nauru, and then they go and top up at Ocean Island, you know. And you generally had a full cargo for Jellicoe Pier in Auckland. You'd be there for 3 weeks. We won't go into them stories too much, you know.
Not the general
public. But on the there was a lot of problems when we were in. I was on the Australian Enterprise, and a big heavy typhoon came through in Osaka, and we had to get out. Well, we got outside. She was rolling very heavily, you know. The chief officer was called Dunsford, about 33-year-old, and he had a little kid. He said, I'm taking the first trip apprentice and the carpenter forward with me. So I said, oh, look, you better take a piece of rope each with you, about a fathom, it's about 6 foot, and make sure you tie yourself in. The chief officer said, you're coming too? I said, no, I'm not. I said, she's tipping. She's just going along and she's dipping and staying there and then coming back up and goes back down a quick. They were halfway up there, and the chief officer got thrown straight over the side. You know that he went under the ship 3 or 4 times. We tried launching the lifeboat and it all got smashed up, and we'd left him there. When we got to Sydney, the big inquiry was on, stupid questions, how you got on with the chief mate and all this business. And out of the blue, John Bentley, who had been chief mate at the Triester with me, he joins her, you know, and they said, we're going to Tasmania because there's been the hold-ups of all the caravans over in Tassie. There's over 300 caravans, people and cars, so we're sending the Australian Enterprise over to Burnie to get them. But we never had no leave when we got to Burnie, because it was like a madhouse, you know that, because we did the lashings in them days. And at midnight, John Bentley came to me and he said, how's the back door? I said, she's well secure. I said, we've got a well done, a very good friend of mine, Sean Breen. He was the man that with the big spanners tightening the bottle screws and that. And so he said, I want you to go on the wharf and put a fire hose on it and see it's not leaking. I said, it doesn't leak. So we put a fire hose on it, it was all right. He said, what time are you turning the crew tomorrow? I said, well, the time we finish will be after 1. It'll be a 9 a.m. turn to. He said, fair enough. So we got up for breakfast and I said to Les Gaffney, the Peggy, I said, how's that mate going? He's only been here a few days. He said, oh, I seen him go past here about 6 o'clock this morning. I said, oh, did you? Well, 11 o'clock, the chief steward came to me and he said, we put John Bentley's tray outside his cabin and he's not in it. Well, the alarms went off. We searched for 11 hours with 9 other ships and planes and that, never found him. Well, the great thing was the inquiry in Sydney again. 2 chief officers got lost in a month, so that went round the coast like a buzz, you know that. What happened to the chief mates? And some of the stupid questions, how long you knew John Bentley, and you know, they ask everybody these mad questions, you know that. I think they were trying to fit someone that was going on, which was ridiculous, you know. But John Bentley had a bad leg, And what I thought it must have happened, he might have just climbed over to see if the back door was leaking or something. That's all I can think of. But no one ever found him.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Any more histories?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, well, that was great, Bill.
Any other bad weather in that you're in, Deanie?
Bivan?
Any other bad weather in that you were in?
Yes, I was on an old British ship called the Avis Moat in 1951, and we loaded manganese ore in we joined her in Adelaide, a couple of us, you know that. But the other Aussie bloke with me, Freddie Scottman, he said, no, I'm not going on it. I said, well, I'm going, because I said, I got out of the Iron Kimberley, and I said, I'd rather be in this one. She's going overseas. Well, she was a wreck, you know. And just before I joined her in Adelaide, Macarays were the agents, and we went light ship to the Lourenco Marks in Portuguese East Africa and loaded coal for Port Sudan. Then we went back to Durban and loaded manganese ore. She was an old ship built during the war, and she split in the deck 9 places, you know that. They'd lost some victory ship, she'd sunk ahead of us, and she used to get along about 6 knots, you know that. And the ship I come back home was much better, was the Devon. She'd get along about 22 knots or something, you know. But some of the ships around the coast, I made a few mistakes when I was on the Camellia. She was the ex-Caramba. She had 16 derricks. And we were going from Western Australia light ship to Port Pirie to load lead. And I thought one of the places was Pirie, we'd be there, so I put all the derricks up. And in those days you wasn't allowed to put them up at sea. And we put them up in St Vincent Gulf there, and the Warrior Tears crew rang the Union, and the Union officials had come all the way from Adelaide to pull me into gear, so you shouldn't have put the derricks up, you know. But we had fellas like Donny Orr and a few more of them there, and she was there for over 2 months because the wharfies condemned all the runners. We had to renew all the blocks, everything. Yeah.
What was the difference between the overseas ships you sailed on and the Australian ships?
Australian ships had the best conditions, you know. The British ships were very low paid, £24 a month, and for an AB it got up to £28 a month, which was peanuts. But you never, the Australians, we never had any overseas ships, and I ran into Pat Garrity in London, you know, the Red Ensign was a famous place. Half the British people were trying to talk Aussie because they were always on the bum to us, you know. But there was that many seamen stranded over there, you know. And I disappeared off the Devon once she came back. I'd signed a contract for 2 years, but I disappeared off her in Townsville many years ago. Never went back to it.
Took a period jump.
Yeah, jumped, yes. But
what about the Swedish ship, the Kumels?
Oh, I could see why they were so clean.
Yeah.
Boy, they worked you there. But the money was much better than the Australian coast. Their conditions, once you got into port, no one worked. Once you went to sea, you worked, you know. And they were on the American run. We went Fiji, Honolulu, and 9 ports in America and back again. We went to a place called Crofton, loaded timber in Vancouver Island, all those places. But she used to clock along about 23 knots. You know, that took us 19 days from San Pedro to Brisbane. And the Swedes had a great idea. If you're on the gear, they called it stop turn. They'd go up to the hotel. I was on the gear when she went straight from America to Brisbane. And they sent me back a steak and 2 cans of beer and things like that. And they had a great thing. They had their meetings, and when you joined a Swedish ship, you automatically had to go into their union. And I told Roger Wilson this, and Roger said to me, well, pay your own union book up for the year, and you can also join theirs too, because that's what you've got to do. Yeah. But they automatically, you've got to join when you joined us. But their conditions were very good, extremely good, you know that. The food was plenty of fish, of course, but I'll tell you what, I wondered why they were so clean. boy, that's how they were so clean.
Yeah, anything else you want to say? Your brother beat you. Your brother's beat you well and truly.
Well, I miss Frank. I was only on one ship with him called the Murnu, but him and I used to run into each other. We'd run into each other either in Newcastle. He was always in some wreck and I was in some wreck. Most people think he was only in the tugs, but he had quite a few old wrecks around the coast and that, you know.
No, it's one of the wrecks you mentioned a while ago was my first ship at sea, the Iron Kimberley.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah. But they were good ships.
Yeah.
Oh, for the age of them ships that were built in Australia, they had the best accommodation, and they were so well looked after. They were so well looked after because you were never with a mop out of your hand putting fish oil on the decks and things like that. And after a couple of months you'd scrape that off, the steel was perfect. They were wonderful ships. I couldn't knock the iron boat. They had a lot of people would never go in them, but because they had to throw hatchboards and 3 tarps, 1 on the wood and 2 in the cleats and things like that. The deck boys putting the wedges in with the carpenter and things like that. And if you threw the tarps behind the winches there, and after it had been raining and that, and trying to get them out, you know. But most of the time they never used the derricks; they were just clamped up there and things like. But they were very good feeders. I would say the iron boats, you had a good meal there. Adelaide Company, I'd say, was the worst feeders, and Union Company. The Union Company had a strange thing. When you joined their ship, they gave you a book, and you had to sign for your knife, fork and spoon and everything like that, and that you had to write out with how many ships did the BA were you in Union Company. We had a very strong bosun there, Fang Wright, and he'd rather take you on the wharf than give you a job, you know. And we had a few notorious people there, the Burling brothers and Bluey Dent, Kevin Gore. I won't mention too much about Kevin, you know. But the whole thing is those jobs are gone now. You know that.
Companies are gone.
The companies are gone, you know that. Like I used to like the ship John was on there, Australian Escort. I used to always see Hawkeye and I'd run into him and say, oh, she's falling apart, or she's not looking too well, isn't she? And like I went Mickey Gallagher. Mickey Gallagher was the other bosun on the Australian Enterprise. The only pint size, I'd say, gee, you got a clean Mick. I'd say, and he'd be always doing the gangway when I got there, made sure it was all done. And blokes like Ian Penlington, do you know that? I've had 5 ships with Ian Penlington, never says much, but it's just top unionist, top seaman, do you know that?
I think he's finally either retired or he's thinking about retiring.
Yeah, been out for 6 months. I seen him at the last stop work meeting. And blokes that were one of the best blokes down below I've seen was Morgan Anderson.
Boxhead.
He was with us on the Australian Enterprise there, and we had a guy called Ray Haddigan. He fought Joe Lewis. He was a pint-sized bloke, but I think he had a bit of a scrambled brain because every time he got drunk, he wanted to fight everybody. And we got into Sydney, and I said, come on, Morgan, we'll all go to the movies. When we got to the movies, Ray Haddigan said, where's my ticket? I said, oh, well, buy your own. He said, my Marge said, if I get invited to the movies, you've got to pay. Well, we had to pay for him, and we had to buy him food. When he got back, he said to Morgan, I want you on the wharf. Morgan said, oh, leave me alone. I've just spent $30 on you now. Leave me alone. But like Lou Javenic was another good shipmate of mine. I've had 3 ships with Lou. Do you know that? And if I ever had too much to drink, he used to drop me off on my brother's veranda and drive off. Do you know that? And another good man that was in the industry was Bert Nolan. I could never go anything wrong against Bert because he was a darn fantastic guy, you know. When I first went to sea, he was at sea, and he just left the Murnu as I joined her, you know. Right. Yeah, but he was a tough old fireman, you know. He was a very tough man, Bert, you know. He didn't, and a lot of people didn't know he could handle himself very well. During the Depression, he walked all around Australia, just bumming around, and then went in the army.
He'd be a little bit disappointed in his nephew.
Oh yes, definitely. definitely, you know that. But the whole game's gone now, you know that. The comradeship's not there, you know. As John was saying about stop work meetings, you see the same faces, the same face.
But the nephew I was talking about is the leader of the opposition now.
Oh yes,
Short, that's his
yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's true. I'm not too keen on him myself, you know. So he's agreeing too much with the other guy.
Yeah, yeah,
You know?
yeah. Bert would be turned in his grave.
But the policy was when you were on a ship, you all went along and voted Labor, because if you voted Liberal, you're going to lose your job.
Yeah, that's right.
You know. And I'll just throw another couple of things in about ASIO. I've been trying to get my file because when I was on the Triester, I was very militant, going to demonstrations, and Roger had me rushing round here with tribunes and that. And when I was staying at my mother's place, the 2 security police came there. They told my mother that I was a danger and there was danger to the country and all this bull. Then they had my brother under surveillance, and they told me brother that people were putting him in. His own members of the union were putting him in, his activity. I was pulled up with the Vietnam War and things like that. But I've tried to get my file out from ASIO, and I've had no trouble, no worry at all, because they don't seem to give it to me, you know. Yes. But bringing back names like Captain Evans, I have a few nightmares over him, you know.
And yet the other bloke was a typical. It was quite the opposite, wasn't he, George Kitchen?
Oh, okay. And Kent. Yeah. Kitchen was about 6'6", I think.
Wasn't he just?
Very
big boy.
But I think Evans, I think he was in the German prisoner of war camp. Shangy, was he?
Yeah,
I think they'd done something to his head or something, because he was nuts.
Well, was he what? Yeah.
He was really nuts. You know? They're all getting round the deck with no shirts on, and why are they walking around with the hat? That bosun's got his hat turned back to front. Why is that? He said, you're in my chambers now. I said, what are we in a court of law? He said, who asked you to sit down? I said, I generally sit down. I had a lot of trouble with him. He got me in the end, anyhow.
Yeah, when I joined it after he'd got you, 17 of us joined her one day. 17.
Yeah.
He was a horrible little bastard, that bloke.
Yes, it is. It could go down on the record that all the officers and the stewards and the cooks all sat on the wharf, refused to sail with me.
Yeah.
Yes, that's another history, you know. But the Seaman Junior members stuck by me, you know. Yes. Yes, Captain Evans. Yeah. All I said, give us a month's money. Freddie Watson said, if you get a month's money, you're not going, eh? I said, I'm going. I've had enough of this. And the strange thing, and when I joined the Elton Griffin, we're going out of the heads, and there's the big Triester, the light ship, and the Elton Griffin's like this. We're going down to Western Port to pick up a barge to take it to Eden, you know. That was a lovely trip too. The ventilator broke off, and I grabbed all the ham bones, oil skin, and wrapped them up around it, put in the ventilator, because the seas were coming over that much, and the wheel was like that. No iron mic on them, you know.
Oh, man, yeah.
When she got into Eden, all the crowd headed up the road, get on the drink. I said, this is crazy, we're leaving at midnight. 2 of them would go, you couldn't carry on with it, you know, because everybody was starting to get seasick. She was playing up that much, you know. Well, that's about my history anyhow.
That it is, Dean?
And I think I thought the sea life's been my life, but it did cost me marriage, isn't it? I've got about 5 grandkids, plenty of kids to look after me, you know.
Yeah. Never had the pleasure of sailing with you, Dean. You were supposed to once.
Yes.
It's supposed to be your opposite number on, which one was that?
That was the Australian Advance.
Advance, yeah.
I told everybody.
I went to the Oscar Star.
Yes, Higgins.
Which was the sister ship to that wreck.
Yeah, well,
Scottish Wizard.
A strange thing about, you told me all about the one I was joining, the Scottish Wizard, that it was an Osco ship, and it was. And some of the people say, oh, it wasn't, but it was.
Yeah, no, it was. It was the Osco stream.
And what's his name, Newitt? Ian Pendleton said no, she's an Osco ship, you know. But a strange ship, she broke down everywhere,
Yeah.
you know. Couldn't get the anchors out anywhere, you know, so we had to get, when we got to Fremantle, we had to get a truck on the wharf. We put wires on the back of this big truck to drag the anchor onto the wharf.
Yeah.
That rusted in, you know. And by the way, she leaked a lot too. We put 4 tonne of concrete in a box. So the water was coming up through one of the tanks that much when we left Port Said light ship. And we had to build this wooden box and mix concrete and get it down into the tank. And what's his name? He's dead and gone now. Little Gary Campbell.
Yeah.
He said, I can't cope with this darn cement business. He said, I said, well, if you don't put it in, the darn ship's going to sink.
Yeah, that's right.
And she went and still stayed with that big box of cement. The box was that high in the end. They said, well, you've made it too high. I said, I've never mixed bloody concrete in my life. You know? But she was a wreck.
Yeah. I remember going down to see you when you come into Holden Dock, and the first thing I hear from a bloke from above, this fucking crane won't work. And I thought, that's what happened exactly on the Osco Star.
Nothing worked on it.
Yeah, nothing.
And you know, the accommodation was shocking. You know?
Yeah.
It was one of the worst. The next meeting, I'll bring some photos of the galley,
Yeah.
of what they were doing to the galley. I should have brought them in today and showed you, because I've got to send them to the cook in the West. He's retired.
Yeah.
And we took her away to sea like it, you know that. And the cook there, they had a shocking time. You know,
Yeah, it's the same as the Osco Star.